Now we move to other business. And the first item on the agenda is consider adopting a resolution of intent to institute district elections for city council seats by the November 2022 regular election, and consider entering into a settlement agreement to resolve a notice of violation of the California Voting Rights Act. And the staff presenter in this particular case will be Dave Derflinger, our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the introduction. And our legal counsel, Dylan Johnson, has been the point person on this, as your council's aware. And I'm going to turn it right over to Dylan to walk us through the proposed actions this evening.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you, Mayor. So as you stated, this item is to consider the adoption of a resolution of intent to establish a district-based election system for city council seats by the November 2022 regular election, and to consider entering into a settlement agreement with the prospective plaintiffs that serve the city with a notice of violation of the California Voting Rights Act. I'm going to start with a little bit of repetition from the July 31st meeting, where I provided a public report on the notice of violation and the Voting Rights Act. I'm going to just repeat some of that information for the benefit of members of the public that weren't able to attend that session, so that we all have that background information in mind. So as your council is aware, generally speaking, most local jurisdictions elect to their governing board on one of two systems, either the at-large or district-based system. The city of Carpinteria has used the at-large system since incorporation in 1965. In the at-large system, the entire council is elected by the entire electorate of the city of Carpinteria, with each voter being allowed to cast one vote for each council seat. In the district-based election system, the city is divided up into districts. In this case, it would be 4 or 5 districts, and only voters within that district would cast a vote only for the city council seat that represents their district. The notice of violation that was the impetus for this item was served on the city on July 3rd, and it alleged that the city's voting system is characterized by racially polarized voting, which we'll discuss in a moment what that means. The notice provided a number of factual allegations, including allegations about city council elections since 1994, stating that 7 out of the total of 58 candidates running for city council had been Latino during that period, and 2 out of the 30 elected had been Latino during that period. The notice provides more factual information, more statistics on voting patterns. It also alleges that votes on ballot measures, including Prop 187 and 209 and Measure S, exhibited racially polarized voting as well. According to 2015 U.S. Census survey, 51% of the white population in Carpinteria has college degrees, and 7.6% of the Latino population has college degrees, again stating allegations in the notice of violation. It also alleged that Latinos experience lower rates of possessing a high school degree, lower per capita income, and higher rates of being uninsured. And it also stated or quoted information from a couple of historical books, one entitled The Liso School for the Mexican Children, and another entitled The Carpinteria Images of America, that discuss the past segregation in Carpinteria, and by past from the 1920s, 30s, that era, with respect to housing, recreation, and higher schooling and higher education. I should state one thing if I just go back to that slide. And then one additional note, the original notice and then subsequent communications with the prospective plaintiffs discuss the possibility of a settlement offer to allow the city a greater amount of time to make the transition to a district-based election system. And that's what is going to be before your council tonight, part of the action before you tonight. So this all happens in the context of the California Voting Rights Act, which was adopted effective January 1st, 2003. The Voting Rights Act provides specifically that an at-large election system may not impair the voting power of a protected class. Protected class in this case being a minority population. So the California Voting Rights Act is directed directly at the at-large election system and provides essentially that the only legal cover from a violation based on disenfranchisement or racially polarized voting is the move to district-based elections. It defines racially polarized voting is really the keystone here, and it's defined as voting in which there is a difference in the choice of candidates or other electoral choices that are preferred by voters in a protected class, and in the choice of candidates and electoral choices that are preferred by voters in the rest of the electorate. That's the definition of racially polarized voting, and that's what the California Voting Rights Act prohibits. In practice, when these cases are litigated, the courts look at a variety of factors to determine whether there's racially polarized voting. And they do this by examining the results of elections where at least one candidate is a member of the protected class, elections involving ballot measures, and other electoral choices that affect the rights and privileges of protected members. The courts look at things such as whether voting patterns correlate with the race of the voter, whether minority-preferred candidates are not elected, and the extent to which members of a protected class bear the effects of past discrimination in areas such as education, employment, and health, which hinder their ability to participate effectively in the political process. So obviously, these are all factors that went into the notice of violation. It's important to remember that under the California Voting Rights Act, proof of an intent on the part of the voters or the elected officials to discriminate against the protected class is not required. So this means in practice that an allegation of a CVRA violation does not imply that the city council or the voters are acting in a discriminatory manner, but rather is an allegation that the overall at-large electoral system is resulting in disenfranchisement. So just a couple of the benefits and drawbacks people talk about when they weigh at-large versus district-based election systems, and this is not exhaustive. There are certainly other claims that people make, but just a couple for illustration, and the main ones that are raised is that in the at-large system, the governing body answers to the entire electorate, so that some would argue that that provides for a more unified city and a more unified governing body. And others claim that at-large is unnecessary in smaller cities where it's possible to do widespread voter outreach by each individual council member. You think about a city like L.A., that's just impossible with the size of their population and the size of the geography for any individual council member to effectively reach out to the entire population. But Carpinteria is obviously vastly smaller. In terms of the arguments in favor of district-based elections, arguments are that the council or governing body is more responsive to their individual constituents when they have a smaller focus group to represent. That it increases the voting power for the minority population, which is the main argument here, and that non-incumbents fare better. In terms of process, the California Voting Rights Act provides what is referred to as a statutory safe harbor. And what this means is that if you want to sue a city or any local jurisdiction for a violation of the act, you have to start by serving the notice, which was done in this case. And then you can't commence suit for at least 45 days. If the council or governing body adopts a resolution of intent setting out the intent and some basics of the time frame to make a transition, then they can't sue for at least another 90 days. And during those 90 days, the governing body must hold 4 hearings to consider public input and consider draft maps on the districts, and then adopt an ordinance officially transitioning. If all that is done, and this is a quick time frame, as you can see, 135 days, and the transition is formally adopted, then no one can sue based on a violation of the act. But the important note, the plaintiffs that filed the notice can seek, still in that event, seek up to $30,000 in costs for preparing the notice. An alternative to the statutory safe harbor to avoid litigation is a settlement agreement, a pre-litigation settlement agreement, which is what your council will be considering tonight. And in a pre-litigation settlement agreement, the city or whatever local jurisdiction you're dealing with essentially establishes its own time frame with the prospective plaintiffs in that case, and that prevents the prospective plaintiffs, if the city fulfills the terms of the agreement, from suing the city for the Voting Rights Act claim. Just a few statistics on the Voting Rights Act to keep in mind. Since 2006, approximately 66 cities and 150 school districts have switched. In recent years, this has included Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, and Goleta. There is no reported case of an agency prevailing in litigation. The attorney's fees in these cases have ranged from the hundreds of thousands in the low end to multi-million dollars, and the city is not eligible to recover its fees, even if it litigates and wins in litigation. So litigating a California Voting Rights Act claim is a very risky and potentially costly proposition. So that brings us to the terms of the settlement agreement that the plaintiffs have agreed to in this case. And I'll note that the copy of the agreement attached to the staff report is not signed, but I have, since the staff report and the agenda were made available, received a signed copy from the plaintiffs. It is pretty basic in its terms. The council is required to adopt a resolution of intent to institute district elections by the 2022 regular election, and it's required to do that at this meeting, the August 14th meeting. If that is completed, if that is done tonight, prospective plaintiffs would commit not to sue the city prior to 2022. And obviously, at the point the city actually makes the transition to district elections, it would no longer be subject to a lawsuit under the Voting Rights Act. Council, it's important to note that council retains its full discretion, which is always a requirement of settlement agreements that the council enters into, because the council is not, under law, the council cannot essentially hand away its discretion. So at any point in the future, the council could decide in 2022, we're not going to adopt this ordinance. But of course, if the council did that, then it would be subject to suit by the plaintiffs. And it requires payment of $30,000 in costs to prepare the notice to the plaintiffs in this case. Staff has reviewed the substantiation of the costs and determined that they are reasonable. So finally, next steps and timeline. The adoption of the resolution of intent, which is part of your council packet, and I haven't talked about that specifically, but that is also a very basic commitment. It is the commitment to make the transition to district elections by the 2022 regular election and fulfill all the requirements of the Voting Rights Act to make that transition, which again are 4 hearings on mapping and then adopting the ordinance. The reason for delaying it to 2022 is to allow the city or allow the city to incorporate census data that from the 2020 census, which will not be available until 2021. And this is the same agreement that was struck in Goleta. Because we're so close to the next census, it makes sense just to give it a few more years, and that census data may change where the boundaries would be drawn and other considerations that are important for this process. As I said, 4 mapping hearings and adopt the ordinance in early 2022 to allow time for the county recorder to properly implement the 2022 election in November. One issue that the council will need to consider at that point in 2022 is whether to adopt 4 districts, an elected mayor, or 5 districts and an appointed mayor. Again, the plaintiffs in this case expressed willingness to allow the city to consider either, and so that is something that the council and the city retains discretion to determine at that date. And then just to keep in mind moving forward, if the council does decide to implement or approve the settlement agreement and adopt the resolution of intent tonight, there is one difference in holding district-based elections. Well, there's one main difference in terms of what the city will need to do on an ongoing basis, and that's reevaluating the district boundaries every 10 years when census data is made available to make sure that things haven't shifted so that census line or district lines have to be redrawn. So that will be something that occurs on an ongoing basis. but and would obviously involve some cost to the consultant to assist the city in drawing the proper boundaries. But on the other hand, that consultants tell me that work in this field that there are lesser costs in holding district elections generally because there are fewer voters that vote in each election. So there are less costs in sending out ballots and such and that. So what I'm told is the costs basically sort of even out. And so with that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Very comprehensive report, and I'm sure people out there watching appreciated it as well as the people in the audience. Now, first, are there any questions for Dylan from council?
I have one.
Greg?
You mentioned the plaintiffs are asking for $30,000. Can you get into a little more detail on what that goes toward?
Yes, through the mayor, Councilmember Cardy, the costs go to pay basically their fees to the demographers and research people that put together all the information that was necessary for the notice. So you talk about, I referenced some of the statistics they put in there about what Carpinteria's size, its population, what past voting patterns have been, how many Latino candidates have run. All that information obviously needs to be compiled, collected, refined, and then written up in a staff report. And there are also some legal costs, though my recollection is that in this case the legal costs are fairly minor. It's mainly the services of the demographers and researchers that went into drafting the notice that was served.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for Dylan? Seeing none, then I'm going to turn it to public comment. And unless Dave, you have anything to add? No. Okay. Anyway, then I'll turn it over to public comment. And I have one speaker slip, and that is Lanny Ebenstein. Lanny, welcome.
Mayor Shaw, members of the council, thank you for your service to the community. As someone who's been interested in district elections for many years in Santa Barbara County, I'd like to encourage you to adopt the resolution of intention that's before you this evening. I think it represents a compromise in terms of there's flexibility as to when district elections would be implemented, either in 2020 or 22, determining on what the council thought was the best course. And there's also flexibility with respect to whether there should be an elected mayor or an appointed mayor. So I think that there is a lot of flexibility there that will provide more discussion by yourselves in the future that will enable you to make the determinations that you think are best for Carpinteria. I think, too, that particularly looking at the city of Santa Barbara, there's no question that there was a big increase in voter turnout and in the number of candidates for office, because it's no longer the case that, you see it in both the 2015 race but also in the 2017 race with 3 seats up each time and then multiple candidates in each district. You actually have more candidates, total candidates running. And as someone who was involved in some of the elections in 2015, it was great to see so much interest and enthusiasm in parts of town where there hadn't been interest in elections before. Particularly, I'm thinking on Milpas with yard signs up and things like that. It really made a difference. So I think that was positive. I think that'll lead to more individuals being interested in serving on city commissions, and I think that and committees, and I think that that'll lead to a more diverse council and a council that Carpinteria is a very special place. Anyone who's lived in the south coast of Santa Barbara County knows that, and I think that it's something that will enhance Carpinteria as it has enhanced other communities. The only other comment I'd make is that I thought one of the really good suggestions that came up in some of the earlier discussion was the ability to work more with local schools. And as a former school board member, I've always advocated that. I think that if the city and the school district can work more closely together, I think that's positive. It doesn't appear that that's going to be part of the proposal that's before you this evening, but I think that's a good idea to keep in mind for the future. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Lenny. And now if I could ask if there's anyone else out there who would like to speak on this issue, and if so, Bob, then remember to fill out another slip when you're done.
I just wondered if Dylan could give some clarification on the $30,000 fee. There's, I've heard rumors around town that the plaintiffs are demanding this, and nothing could be farther from the truth. They're not demanding anything. This is a requirement from the California Voting Rights Act. And could you explain further, Dylan, on that?
Dylan, could you respond?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
The commenter, Mr. Franco, is correct that under the Voting Rights Act, it allows a prospective plaintiff to obtain up to $30,000 in costs for providing the notice. But the way the statute actually is written, it requires that the plaintiff serve a demand on the city for its costs. So I think that might be where the language about a demand comes into play. The statute obviously, again, caps it at $30,000, but does not say that lesser costs could not be demanded from the local jurisdiction.
Thank you, Dylan.
Ask a follow-up
Al?
question. Who's the check written out to?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Clark, the check, as provided in the terms of the agreement, will be made out to Robert Goodman's trust account. He is the attorney of record in this case, and so normally, of course, when funds are to be paid to a client, they are by ethical standards in the state of California. They must be retained by the lawyer's trust account in the trust account.
Thank you, Dylan. Greg, you
I
have
just
a
wanted
question?
to thank Bob for bringing up that comment there.
Okay. There you go. Thank you. Are there any other comments on this particular issue? If there are, then please. And you already filled out a slip, I believe.
Leslie Westbrook again. I just
Hey,
have a quick
Leslie.
question. This may be dumb. So if you have 4 or 5 different districts and a representative from each of those districts, does the person running for that district need to live in that district, or can someone live in a district and run for that district is my question.
Dylan, could
Anybody
you
knows?
answer that? Thank you.
Mayor, with the caveat that we have not yet gotten into detail exactly on how the district election system would work, my understanding is that you would have to reside in that district to be elected from that district in most cases.
Thank you, Dylan. I know how that works like that in Santa Barbara.
I looked into it a little bit, and if you move out of the district, you have to step aside from your seat.
Okay. Now, is there any other public comment on this item? Frank, welcome back to the dais, but remember to fill out another slip.
I, being one of the plaintiffs, I just want to clarify that I will not be receiving any financial gain from this, not one dime. The motive and the intention is for the community. The interest is the community. And I just want to make that clear. Not one dime is to my gain. That's it.
Thank you, Frank. Now, is there any other public comment in this matter? Seeing none, I will bring it back to council for either more questions and or deliberation.
Mayor, if I may interrupt, I believe
Yes.
you have one more comment card from Jack Niederprium. I may have pronounced that incorrectly. I apologize if I did.
No,
Oh, I'm
that's
sorry.
That's on the
I
next.
had a notation. It was for this one. I apologize.
Okay, that's fine. Al?
Mayor, if you're ready, I move we adopt Resolution 5743 declaring the City Council's intention to transition from an at-large election system for city council seats to a district-based election system by the time of the November 2022 regular election. And I also move that we approve and authorize the mayor to sign the proposed conditional settlement agreement and released with prospective plaintiffs resolving allegations that the city's at-large election system violates the California Voting Rights Act.
I'll second that.
Motion by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Vice Mayor Nomura. Seeing no other discussion, I think in this particular case, we will do a roll call vote. Fidela, if you would, please.
And the record would show that Councilmember Brad Stein is absent. Vice Mayor Nomura,
Aye.
Councilmember Clark,
Aye.
Councilmember Cardy,
Aye.
and Mayor Shaw.
Aye. Thank you all for attending and discussing this issue.